I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Christina Ricci, one of the stars of the very addictive new Showtime series, Yellowjackets. So just jumping right in here, you play Misty, the older version of Misty, and she is a very interesting character to say the least. She's kind of nerdy and she doesn't mind going to extreme measures to get what she wants, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
And she's just very complex. But I'm curious if you just had an understanding of her like right in the beginning, right off the bat, and just how you would describe Misty and like who she is deep down.
Well, the understanding that I had of Misty was that she was somebody who, all I saw was the pilot, and then, discussed, of course, who she was and who she would be in the season with the EPs and writers. But my real understanding just from that one scene in the pilot is that this is a person who her mode of operation is passive aggression, and behind this like adorable demeanor and facade, kind of, because she's, like you say, nerdy, easy to dismiss. She, like, even though the wig and the glasses are like ugly, still kind of adorable. She's wearing kitten stuff, but then she exhibits so much hostility through this like hard smile. And for me, I just loved the idea of playing somebody who, by virtue of their history, has found the only way to get what they want is this passive aggressive behavior, forcing people, manipulation. And I love the idea of really playing that manifestation of rage. So, and then there's the other stuff that goes along with Misty, where, probably the reason she has suffered for decades is she's always shunned from the group, but she probably should be shunned from the group because she is not a safe personality. She exhibits very early on, like as a child, we see her exhibiting sociopathic personality traits, and then we see her do really crazy things the second she has a little tiny bit of social standing. So obviously that informs that she's also probably maybe a little psychopathic, but I'm no doctor.
There you go. Well, one of the very specific character details that I love is just her love of musicals, just like specifically the musicals of Andrew Lloyd Webber, which is just such a fun detail. Of course, loves Phantom of the Opera, and I mean, from doing your own process of like finding your way into the character, did you think about like the specific details of why she would gravitate to like Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals in particular, why she likes cats, like these tiny things?
Yeah, I think that with Misty, she has a really hard time understanding other people and a really hard time understanding why they like the things they like. I don't think she actually has any genuine like hobbies or likes or musical taste or clothes taste. I think she has realized she needs to have those things. And then she has sort of piecemealed all this stuff together because she doesn't naturally really care about like pop culture or what other people are into. I think that if we found out what Misty was actually into, it's probably quite disturbing.
Fair point.
It's in her basement, basically.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, I'm also wondering because we see the flashbacks of Misty in the 90s out in the wilderness. How much did you find it helpful to read those earlier scenes, even if you're not involved in them, like physically on the set, just to wrap your head around the context of how she got to be who she is as your version of her?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that stuff is so important. If, very rarely do you, it's also such a luxury, and it's so great to have. So rarely do you get to go back and see the first moment that a character experienced power, being shunned, falling in love, like those things, because we get to see them in such detail, they're so informative for me about, if these things happen cyclically in a life, so they just keep happening to her over and over and over again, what is the person that ultimately is created from all of that? So it's so incredibly helpful to have that.
Yeah. Well, speaking to that younger self, you have Samantha Hanratty playing the younger version of Misty. I'm curious just what conversations the two of you had, just to make sure that you were consistent, but still showing that these are two different parts of her life.
Yeah, we met before we shot the second episode. Before we shot, well, before we shot the whole season. So we shot the pilot, we didn't really hang out. And then right before second episode, we met and we had a lunch and we just talked about all the references that I had been given by the writers and EPs, all the references she had been given by the writers and EPs, because that sometimes lets you, helps you to understand what they don't want. You know, like if they're giving somebody specific references to correct something in their personality they don't ever want in the character, then it's sort of informative to share those things. And then we also talked about our plan, like how we planned on executing this character and the different things that her Misty would have and the things that mine would have because of that time and space and consistent sort of life experience.
Hmm. Well, you also get a chance to work with some pretty phenomenal actresses in the modern day storyline: Melanie Linsky, Tawny Cypress, Juliette Lewis. And I know that on some sets we do see like this attempt to really go method with it and like try to replicate the dynamic of the characters and the sort of project itself. But I'm curious, because Misty has like this distance from the other characters and she's this outsider, I mean, was there any sort of attempt to sort of replicate that, or was it kind of just like switching it on and off sort of thing?
We didn't really do that. I mean,
Yeah.
well, all for older actresses, we all kind of formed a bond and had a text chain and a Marco Polo group. And, we talked all the time and we talked about issues we were having because we didn't all work together very often. So we talk about like issues we had when we did work or problems we were having, or I don't like this one element. We would get advice from each other about how to approach the writers, or, we just really bonded and we're sort of there for each other. And it was great. And I think a lot of the chemistry they see like between me and Juliette, that kind of stuff just like happened. I'm very much a younger sister and she's very much an older sister. And you can kind of see that dynamic playing out a little bit. And there were scenes where like there were scenes and things were cut out, but like where she's crying and she pushes me for no reason, so I pushed her back, and it's very like sisterly kind of thing that just sort of happened.
Well, yeah, I did want to go to that Juliet, that dynamic that you have, especially when it's the two of you just off on your own going on the road trip, which is basically, well, it's Misty forcing Natalie to make it into a road trip with the two of them, but really
Like
fun sort of
kidnapping light.
right, exactly. But it's this really fun back and forth that you have, like you said. Can you just talk about those days on set where it's basically just the two of you?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, she and I got along really well, and we have a lot of like, we didn't know each other years ago, but we both went through we were in the same industry and we know a lot of the same people. And so we were able to talk about things that happened in the past that we both were aware of and what our takes were. And it was interesting. It was fun. Um, uh, and we just kind of naturally, we work very similarly when it comes down to the moment of doing the scene and everything. And we just really worked well together.
Hmm. Well, I think from looking at the ambitions of this show and all the different storylines, I feel like there's so many ways that Misty could have come across as two-dimensional, or that, like our understanding of her could just be like, oh, she's the crazy one. But there is this balance that the showrunners and the writers were really able to achieve, I think. And just from working with Ashley and Bart, the showrunners, what was it about their vision and the kind of story they wanted to tell that gave you that confidence that like your character was going to be treated with respect, basically?
Well, I think the whole one, well, I don't know. I can't speak to their whole impetus for making the show.
Mhm.
But I do think that one of the things that comes across so strongly in working with them and in seeing the show and reading the scripts is that they really wanted to show this raw, unedited many different versions of women and young women, and that there wasn't going to be any sort of like winking at the camera, or, that sort of like making it adorable just so it's more palatable, or apologizing, or any of that stuff. And so that was really great. And especially with Misty, I think that character is difficult because she definitely is sort of the comic relief of the show, but you never want that to be the whole thing that the character is. So we did, I worked with them a lot to like little things, like sometimes there'd be like a hysterical prop that Misty was using. And we would take the spirit of that and then make it something that was a little bit more grounded and less sort of like that's on the surface kind of hilarious, just because I do think that the best comedy comes from pain. So you want things to be as grounded as possible. At least I do for this character, I want things to be as grounded as possible. And then this sort of awkwardness feels funny and genuine, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm also just curious, because of the nature of this show and because you grew up in the 90s at such a specific point in time, especially in America, and you were working a lot as a child star during that time. But when you sort of look back on that time, do you have certain elements, like certain defining characteristics of the 90s, that it just feels like a certain kind of attitude, or like pop culture or politics? Like, what are the things that you think about?
I just think about how different the attitude was really back then towards, at least my experience of it was that the attitude towards beauty and fashion and femininity was a little bit different at that time. I mean, it was sort of the late 90s, sort of the height of my initial sort of like fame, I would say. And very much at that time, as an actress doing magazine covers and fashion stuff and all, the idea was to be more, it was less polished and a little bit more off the cuff. And, the more sort of as a woman, like aggressive you were, and less, I don't know, it was sort of like less fishing for validation, I guess. You weren't looking for validation at that time. You were looking to be somebody very different. And so just in terms of like, there were beauty, like our beauty trends were like sparkles, and, fashion was grunge. It was like, how can you mix high-low in the most aggressive way to make it look like you barely tried? You know what I mean? There was this like attitude of cool and like, oh, sorry, I accidentally ended up on this red carpet type of thing, which doesn't exist now, which I think is great. And also just, I don't know, it was sort of more fun, but a little bit more fun than in terms of just being able to like, we had bruises on our legs. Nobody was perfect. And it was just sort of different, a little grittier, I guess.
Yeah. And then now we have the internet. So
yeah, and now
kind of changed everything. Yeah.
Modernized.
Right. Yeah, well, you will be back for a second season. Congrats on that pickup. And we've seen the mystery of what's happened in this modern day storyline really unfolding in these new ways, and the revelation that Lottie is still alive and out there. And we're also seeing Misty being involved in the group. Just curious if you had any expectations going forward, or maybe even just hopes for Misty in season 2.
I find the process of TV and being an actress on a TV show, and only being an actress, not an EP, to be so different than being an actress on a film. Because with a film, your character's entire arc. It just is really different. And what I found so interesting about the first season was that I really had to. It feels like a special skill to be able to make a clearly defined character that no matter what happens, that whether you think it's in line with the character or not, you're always able to execute it as that clearly defined character without knowing, where she's going to go necessarily. And sometimes you don't even know the past, because then they'll write a scene that you're like, oh, I have not been playing her as though that happened in my past. But it's like for me, it's felt like a learning experience, a challenge, and kind of developing this open kind of skill. And so it makes me not even want to ask what comes next season, because I really want to be able to learn how to do that perfectly, no matter what they throw at me. Well, what would Misty act like in this situation, instead of it being like such a huge problem, because I've already come up with all of my own very specific ideas. So it's interesting, because it's not the way I usually work, but I want to get really good at it so that I can, you know what I mean? It just gives you so much freedom. So I haven't asked too much. Someone offered to tell me some stuff, or I think the EPs were like, "Yeah, we'll tell you some stuff," and blah blah blah. And I was like, you know what? I don't know that I want to know. There's a part of me that sort of enjoys the suspense and then finding out. And again, like I said, trying to like hone this new muscle.
Right, living in the present in a way.
Yeah.
Well, just as we wrap up here, I mean, looking at your broader career, you've taken on so many interesting roles, and some of the more notable ones, I think, do have this kind of darker edge to them, like this, and obviously Addams Family, Lizzie Borden. I mean, there you go. I mean, you've really kind of sort of dabbled in this dark material in a lot of different eras of your career, and I'm curious just how much your relationship to the work changes over time in your career, like in terms of being affected by the material or letting it kind of settle into you once you're away from, the role.
I find that the more heightened the reality in which the character exists, the more I'm able to just walk away from it and it doesn't affect me at all. Things that are closer to my life, I have more trouble with emotionally and letting go of the character. And I, in some ways, I am fortunate in that I play very extreme people generally, and they are very different than me. So it's sort of almost like I might even do it because it is safer for me. It's so easy to leave it behind, because it resembles nothing in my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
With Misty, I was affected by the way she looks. The second I would get into character and costume, people would immediately treat me differently. So I got a firsthand kind of experience of like, oh, well, I can imagine what it would turn you into. People constantly like teasing you or making fun of your clothes, or like, you know what I mean? So that was one thing that I was very happy with this character. I could like take it all off and be like, it's still me. And I'll kill you. Stop making fun of me.
Well, on that note, for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Thank you so much, Christina, for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.